am the Scythe, the bringer of salvation. And I shall harvest the souls of the unbelievers, for their stench will linger until the false gods have been cast from this world. Oh.
Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So we're back in Guild Wars 1. A lot of you guys really enjoyed the last video I did, in which we looked a little bit at the Maguuma Jungle 250 years ago in a little bit of preparation for Heart of Thorns, and I figured it might be kind of cool to keep going with it. So in the last episode there'll be a link in the description if you guys didn't manage to check it out. We had a walk into the jungle. We talked about a little bit of the two biomes we encountered here in the first game, and we looked at some of the entry areas. We caught ourselves caught up on the story once again, looked at the Druids Overlook, the Wilds, and the Sage Lands. Well, so for this episode, I want to take a look at the next section of the jungle, and then maybe we'll do one more towards the end, which gets to some of these last areas with the Balthazar Temple and so forth. So this episode starts up with Bloodstone Fen, which is the second mission in the Maguuma Jungle, as you can see, that's located here. This is the climactic moment where we realize that the White Mantle aren't necessarily the good guys. The man who we originally met as sort of an ambassador for the White Mantle, a man named Justikar Hablion, who kind of took us under his wing while we were in Kryta, we've now found out is a bit of an evil, crazy guy, as you saw there, and is killing innocent people. Now, the specifics of why they're killing innocent people to do with the Massar and charging the soul batteries is a bit beyond the scope of this video. Suffice it to say, though, that now we're upset with White Mantle, and we are going to team up with the Shining Blade. So that's kind of where this mission starts, and of course it's at a very important place for the lore of both Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2, because it is the site of one of the shards of the Bloodstone. The Bloodstones, there are like 5 shards spread around Tyria. We've only seen 3 of them, I believe, plus the Keystone, and this was one of the locations that they fell. These are really, really important for the story, even in Guild Wars 2, because we know that hidden within them, stored away by the ancient races, are great repositories of magic. These magic was hidden here to keep it away from the Elder Dragons during their last rising, so that Tyria wouldn't wither up and die and lose all of its magic altogether. And so these shards have been scattered. This has to mean something for the Morgemoth story arc, considering Morgemoth is right on the doorstep of one of these Bloodstones. An interesting little factoid, yes, we could explore here in Guild Wars 1. No, we cannot explore there yet in Guild Wars 2. But if you look at one of the earliest maps we ever got of the game, which came with Ghosts of Ascalon, one of the Guild Wars 2 novels, on the inside leaf of that book, you could find a map of Tyria, marking off a bunch of locations. And if you have a look here, you'll see, oh, look, we've got a bunch of dungeons. Crucible of Eternity's marked off. The Ascalonian Catacombs are marked off. Well, also, curiously, is Bloodstone Fen. So perhaps long before launch, ArenaNet maybe did once plan to have this as a place in Guild Wars 2, but those plans fell short, and it never ended up being the dungeon perhaps it was originally intended to be. Well, now, in theory, we should be able to return here. What kind of things will we see? Maybe some leftover Shining Blade-based stuff, perhaps a lot of White Mantle-based stuff, maybe even current contemporary White Mantles still hold their location as somewhat sacred, as they had been shown it presumably by the Unseen Ones, by the Massart. Maybe we'll even find the wreckages of old soul batteries out there. That would be pretty exciting to me. Someone did come to me with a very cool idea as well, that Justikar Hablion died there in the jungle and stayed in the jungle, and it'd be kind of cool if Morgemoth had somehow found his corpse, or he'd be reanimated, reincarnated in some way, and we'd end up fighting him, or we'd learn more about him just by virtue of being in this region of the world. Something interesting to look at once again is that Shaman's Historical Guide to Tyria, which was updated after the last video, by the way, and kind of look at this region of the world once again, and you'll see here the Bloodstone Fen is actually still located north of Verdant Brink. So this is Verdant Brink. This is the new map that will be coming into the game, and that will presumably be able to play in the betas. And yet Bloodstone Fen is still to the north of this, so I'm hoping very much for some kind of a portal. The outpost area that's marked off, where I'm currently stood in game right now, is going to be accessible not very far at all from the adventure and the things we've been seeing already. In fact, I think this is the site of some Itzel or something in Guild Wars 2. But the actual mission area where we found the Bloodstone, where we fought Hablion, these don't seem to be a part of the first map at least. Maybe we'll have an instance up there. I'm a little unsure, really. So what kind of things do we find in Bloodstone Fen as you see this footage roll through? Well, we learn about how the Shining Blade get through the jungle. See, the Shining Blade have learned how to traverse the jungle quite well during this time. The White Mantle, as we originally entered the jungle as a part of, didn't quite understand how they could move around so easily, and it turned out they were building vine bridges. They would plant seeds and magical bridges would grow. You should be seeing this right now all over the place. Now this seems to have been a druid practice, druids being Critons who moved into the jungle and eventually transcended. As you saw in the last episode, we did a bit of a quest with one of them where they were all chanting some ominous stuff that maybe will come to be relevant in Guild Wars 2. And this is what the Shining Blade have been doing. You, the player, learn how to do this. The mission itself involves just a few mechanics around building certain bridges and dragging vine seeds around until eventually you manage to get into the very center of this area, to the Bloodstone Shard itself, where you see the Chosen are sacrificed in front of your very eyes, and you slay Justicar Hablion. So that's pretty much this area. There is a little bit more information here. We can, of course, with any outpost, we can highlight it and do a bit of a read. This description says that the floor of the jungle is damp and uninviting to anyone but thirsty beasts. In one particularly deep chasm lies the remnants of a powerful magical stone said to be a relic from the time when the gods walked on Tyria. Not even the voracious vegetation of the Maguuma will grow upon its surface. They talk about how around the Bloodstone is somehow cursed because of the energies within it, the magics within it, and they specifically say that divine energies will not function around it. Things couldn't live on it. And maybe this is a suggestion. If the vegetation in this entire area can somehow be attributed to Morgemoth, we can maybe say, hey, look, this Bloodstone Shard is in the jungle and can't be touched by Morgemoth because he's never been able to get inside it. It's protected against the Elder Dragons, and that's a particularly exciting idea to me if we get any kind of confirmation on that notion. But equally, it says, like, divine magics don't work. Like, you couldn't resurrect people. It would take a long time to resurrect people. And I wonder whether we'll get any more elaboration there once we can finally, in Guild Wars 2, reach one of these bloodstones and sort of walk upon it once again. But again, not in Verdant Brink. It seems that that's a little bit out of range still. So, completing Bloodstone Fen will take you past a place called the Silverwood and teleport you immediately to Quarrel Falls. Let's have a walk to Quarrel Falls though ourselves, which will take us through this area known as Mamnoon Lagoon. Now, Mamnoon Lagoon is one of these very small maps. It connects the Sagelands to the Silverwood, and it's actually a place we could explore in Guild Wars 2 already. So, the most recent map added to Guild Wars 2 was the Silver Waste. Let's have a look at that Shaman's map here, and as you can see down here, it kind of overlaps with Mamnoon Lagoon. Now, if you're watching this Guild Wars 1 footage roll, the place feels really big. I do feel like there's a very odd sense of scale difference between the two games, like areas seem a lot smaller in Guild Wars 2, but Mamnoon Lagoon was a very pretty small area, didn't have too much lore around it. There was a single quest there in which a Shining Blade agent was blackmailing a member of the White Mantle to obtain troop movements from them, and once you completed this quest and met her, Alari Doubleblade was her name, in Mamnoon Lagoon, once you'd met her, you would do another follow-up quest where you would go out and kill some White Mantle who had got lost in the forest. But aside from that, there really wasn't much to do there. It was just a small area that we could vanquish, just like many zones in Guild Wars 1. It was a big game, but it wasn't very content dense. But it looked very big and very pretty. What does it look like in Guild Wars 2? If you look at this area, you'll recognize this is kind of the far Silver Wastes. And in fact, it would seem in the very center where the lagoon was, underwater perhaps, was the entrance to the cave we visit right at the end of Season 2, where we find a hidden, like, forgotten ruined city area. So this is very curious. The lagoon itself seems to have shrunken and shrunken and shrunken. The only place, one of the very few places with actual water in the entire Silver Waste in Guild Wars 2 is this tiny puddle near the northern fort, and it seems that that's what this wonderful lagoon has turned into, this small puddle just out here, and I think that's very funny to think about. But yeah, so pretty much this entire area, as lush as it looks in GW1, come Guild Wars 2, it's all been desertified, and again, the idea of it becoming the Maguuma Wastes probably has something to do with that. Moving on out of Mamnoon Lagoon, we come to a location called the Silverwood. Now, the Silver Wastes was an exciting place when we first heard the name of it a few months back in GW2 because it was clearly named in reference to the Silverwood. So you can see it again on Shaman's map here. There's a lot of overlap. A lot of the Silver Wastes, or the western Silver Wastes, actually overlaps with what was once the Silverwood. Silverwood's a really cool place. It's a big map. It's a very pretty, lush map. None of that seems to remain come Guild Wars 2's time. And again, it's interesting to me. You should see some footage here of me looking up at a waterfall. It seems interesting to me that this waterfall we're looking at in Guild Wars 1, technically this is like directly over the hidden cave that Kaith had eventually killed Wynn in. Like, is that cave underneath, behind that waterfall somehow? It's a very kind of bizarre perspective to put on things. Silverwood is where we kill this Lost Patrol of White Mantle. Otherwise, there's not too much going on there. We do see a bunch of new vegetation. In fact, even in the Bloodstone Fen mission, we started coming across big plants that seem to have like pod-like houses high up on them. I'll hopefully give you guys some images of those. And even we found some really cool plants that doubled up as fountains too. Plants that had like seemingly been stabbed and they were leaking water in these endless fountain scenarios. These are really pretty. I really want to see these return in Guild Wars 2. There's actually a lot of very exotic looking architecture and plant life in the jungle that we've seen nothing of so far in Guild Wars 2. We've just seen kind of generic palm trees and stuff, for example, in the Silver Wastes. I'd love to see this kind of stuff return. But the Silverwood was full of that stuff. There are a few new enemies we met here too, like the Rot Behemoths. We've actually seen what would appear to be those from the trailers already that we've seen in Heart of Thorns. These guys were buried, rooted into the ground, and they'd stand up in these big like snake-like things that would spit projectiles at you. And otherwise, more of the same enemies we've already been fighting. Plus now, of course, with this quest, a couple of White Mantle too, and the odd Centaur roaming around. One thing I found kind of interesting looking at Shaman's map, actually, with regard to this zone, was how it's half in the Silver Wastes, but it's also half in Verdant Brink too. So whenever we're exploring East and Silverwood stuff, we're actually kind of over Verdant Brink, you know, where we've seen ArenaNet with these demos and the adventure. Yeah, we're kind of stood there. Where we fight the Withen, we're kind of stood there, just way up in the sky at the Silverwood. I also found it kind of cool to think about like how far east you can move. You'll notice that Verdant Brink actually takes us further east, deeper into the jungle in theory, than even we could go in Guild Wars 1 for Bloodstone Fen and the later zones as well, the Falls. So it's interesting that Verdant Brink already is as eastmost as we can get, and then there could be even further maps, even more off on the left there. We do know, of course, by the way, that out to the west over here, from the lore, from the maps we've seen with the Order of Whispers, from the description of a now removed arena from the original game, we do know that there seem to be trade routes and seafaring ways up in this direction, and the continent does end. Will we get all the way over there? Will they expand the map off in that direction? That'd be kind of cool to see, but somehow I doubt it. Now, situated within the middle of the Silverwood is our next outpost. This is the place that we got loaded to before. This is Quarrel Falls, once we'd completed Bloodstone Fen. After we saw the White Mantle convene Confessor Dorian, speak to his men and say, look, these people from Ascalon have betrayed us, we must kill them. Cool little thing about that cutscene, actually, which I guess I'll show at the end of this video, you can find Marcus is hidden there. Marcus being the original Shining Blade guy we met and ends up betraying the Shining Blade, so that's really cool and something I've always very much liked. But this is a very, very luscious area with a really nice, pretty waterfall. Great example of Guild Wars 1 outposts that these days feel kind of empty because a lot of people congregate to the same area. So this is where we could have met other people. But let's read the description of Quarrel Falls. Deep within the Maguuma Jungle lies a tiny outpost surrounded by waterfalls. So lovely and scenic is this place that adventurers often spend more time here than is strictly necessary to resupply. Situated as it is just outside the Silverwood, Quarrel Falls is like the eye of the hurricane, a calm place to rest before the storm begins once again. So yeah, it is a very pretty place. There weren't really any quests we could get here. Guild Wars 1 had a much better skill acquisition system than Guild Wars 2. It wasn't some arbitrary lame thing that you would get in your UI. You would actually meet different skill vendors in different areas of the world, and they'd all offer different selections of wares. So here you could maybe buy some special skills if you wanted. But yeah, overall, just a really cool little outpost, and I wonder whether we're going to see this honoured in any way. Quarrel Falls, some kind of a point of interest maybe. But again, if we have a look over at that Shaman's map, you'll see that Quarrel Falls, actually, we can kind of already travel to. This would be above surface level, I suppose, of where the big underground script jumping puzzle eventually ends in the Silver Wastes. And I doubt we'll ever really get more on that. So the Quarrel Falls in Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars 1, they're not very, very similar terrain-wise, right? It feels weird to me to think that right now, under my very feet, is a huge, huge chasm, maybe, that will be ripped open to the skies over the next 250 years. Though, I suppose that's kind of a cool idea. Next up, leaving Quarrel Falls, we now do head back out into the Silverwood, and we're going to be heading south, not for a particularly long walk. Past a bunch of centaurs, we're going into another new map. We're actually leaving kind of the more jungly, lush biome now, going back to the more desertish one, in an area called Ettins Back. And Ettins Back kind of overlays a lot more with Guild Wars 2's Dry Top now, because, you know, we're going south of the Silver Wastes. Now, a lot of this area that you can see me running around right now is inaccessible in GW2. Here's that Shaman's map, you can see. But there is a significant amount of Ettins Back that we can travel to in Guild Wars 2, and that would be like the last section of Dry Top Guild Wars 2, the kind of very uplands area where all the beetles were, for example, and, you know, the camp with the Skrit trying to steal supplies constantly. There's nothing too special about the Ettins Back to talk about. There seems to be some kind of big camp, a lot more of these old buildings and things in the background if you look in the right areas. But mostly we're just trying to head to one of the most interesting places and relevant places, especially for Silvari characters in Guild Wars 2, and that would be Ventari's Refuge. Ventari's Refuge is where initially, as players of GW1, we met Ventari, the centaur that tended to the pale tree as it grew, wrote his tenets down on a plaque, and would be the guy to influence Silvari culture and mold them into what they are, instead of just mindless minions of Morgemoth, as it would seem. And here he is, Guild Wars 1. Look, we can talk to him right now. Here he is. He's a very special looking centaur, kind of got a unique model of his own. Maybe probably doesn't look exactly how you guys would imagine. A lot of these old character models are kind of weird. But this is where we first met him. We initially met him here at Ventari's Refuge. Later on in the story, like 8 years was it later, when we played Eye of the North, we would meet him once again. This is where the Grove actually will appear, and he would have founded his new area. But this is Ventari. We can speak to him. He doesn't say too much. He says, there was a time once when humans and centaurs lived in peace, but that was long ago. I'm afraid I will not live to see such a time come again, Teteria. What brings you to my Dell, friend? So this is a very unique centaur in that he chooses peace. He wanted to walk away from the wars, and he was driven here. Many of the centaurs even around this area are still hostile. In a mission I showed you guys just last episode, we saw more of them were convening and collaborating to try and get rid of the humans. Well, maybe Ventari's plan didn't totally work, but he was a big influence for an entirely new race to be born on the planet, right? We can read the description of Ventari's Refuge. Named for a wise old centaur with a penchant for peaceful living, visitors to this outpost do their business among the roots of a gargantuan stonewood tree, the largest known specimen of its kind. So this is one of the coolest things about Ventari's Refuge, in that there is this giant tree above us. You know, the scale of some things in this game was immense. And this has got a few interesting things about it. First of all, you'll notice actually the description here calls it a stonewood tree. We don't really see this very much in Guild Wars 2, where they just kind of give random names to plants and things around. Well, stonewood trees, this is not the only one. There are a lot of these thorny looking trees all around these dead areas. And a funny thing to note is this thing isn't actually dead. It's not a dead tree. It's just this is the way these trees live. Like, they're leafless trees and they give off that kind of appearance. And actually these have already been referenced in Guild Wars 2. In Dry Top, if you'll recall, we have those adventuring guys from the Dermond Priory who were pushing further into Dry Top, learning and having cool conversations with one another. I'll read you guys that conversation now. At one point, Explorer Savio says, what did you say those huge trees were called that used to grow in the Maguuma? Stone something? So this already suggests, by the way, that the stonewood trees we're seeing here in Ventari's Refuge don't exist anymore. And Explorer Kitabu says, stone woods. Did you do any research at all before we set out across Dry Top? Savio says, of course I did. Okay, no, I like to pick things up as I go. And Explorer Amoxley, who's the Hylek, says, the Silvari legends say that the tallest stonewood in the jungle grew in Ventari's Refuge. Savio responds by saying, wonder if it could still be there. Hard to picture jungle after weeks in all this sand. And Amoxley says, I can barely remember the colour green. So, you know, these explorers out there in Dry Top right now, they're looking forward to coming here. Dry Top isn't too far away. It's just over here on the right, the Guild Wars 2's Dry Top. You'll notice there's a Guild Wars 1 Dry Top as well. We'll get to in another video. But this is slightly out of range. We'll use Shaman's map for reference here. This is Ventari's Refuge. This is where they were talking about, and these guys were maybe stood just, what, over here somewhere around here is when they were having that conversation. So, will we finally get to return to this Stonewood? I would like to think so. I don't think it's a coincidence that we also have these guys, these centaurs, the peaceful centaurs of a different tribe. They say that they never knew about Ventari and that they may have had common ancestry in the Maguuma centaurs from back then, but they never really knew Ventari at all. And once again, what do they seem to be hanging around in their camp? Some sort of a tree. So, again, this is very cool, and I'm really looking forward to them referencing Ventari's Refuge. This is going to be a huge place. The expansion is already huge for Silvari, and having this key location out here is also going to be pretty awesome too. Anyway, so that's pretty much it, guys. Next episode, we will conclude our little jungle tour here with the last few locations we can travel to. We've got the Reed Bog and the Falls with the Balthazar Temple, one final mission, the elusive, the magical Henge of Denravi, and a small outpost out there in the Tangle Route. So we'll do that next episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hope you found something interesting about GW1, the jungle, the kind of things that we might see and might appear in Guild Wars 2. Let me know if you found anything particularly exciting. And until then, I guess I'll see you guys for the next and final episode. And have a great evening, everyone.
May your soul be lost in the endless mists, never to find rest.
The White Mantle have been called once again to arms. There are betrayers among us. Those who would masquerade as our friends, only to turn and stab at our hearts. I have just received word that these traitors have murdered Justakar Hablion.
They must pay for this.
Yes, my son. When these heathens attacked the White Mantle, they chose their fate. Now it is for us to deliver upon them what they have asked for.
Kill them all!
Yes, my son. We will mete out justice and take our vengeance. Leave no stone unturned. Find the betrayers. Find Hablion's killers. Kill them all.